Hi everybody, in the spirit of sharing is caring, this is my presentation from the Next Reality Festival in Hamburg. I did it as a private individual, so I'm just going to share it. I'm going to put it through Notebook LM as well, so you can see it on my Spotify podcasts, or listen to it, sorry, and I'll probably publish the explainer video that Google makes from it. So the background was just to make a presentation about this asymmetrical collaboration, the screen collaboration mode of applications like Gravity Sketch and Shapes XR and Archeo. The background is, first of all, my background is in 3D digital design tools. I've worked mostly in shipbuilding, plant design, or Anlagebau as you call it in Germany, so large industrial assets, more recently industrial design with Gravity Sketch. And yeah, I've always been fascinated by the tools that we need to use in order to do these large collaborative engineering feats. So without further ado, we'll have a look at the first technology. So if you go back a bit, the first technology that we humans used in order to do large collaborative engineering and design efforts is the humble model, the scale model, the physical model, the engineering model, the different ways that people refer to it. And this has literally been done for thousands of years. So this is a model from the ancient Greeks at the bottom. It's made from cork. It's some kind of building, a small scale. And there's evidence that the Aztecs, the Egyptians, of course, all made models of the great buildings and monuments these days that they went on to build, of course. If we fast forward on the left-hand side here, we've got a very large-scale engineering model from the oil and gas industry. This model is about the size of a car or two cars or a van, really. And they built these models at great expense, took significant time, so that people could all stand in the room, the stakeholders, the decision makers, the money people, and kind of make the final call. Yes, we can build this, it's going to work, we know exactly how it's going to work. So the 3D model was an essential part of the communication needed to build, engineer and design very large, complex things. And then on the right-hand side, architects, of course, are still using physical models regularly. My sister's an architect in Scotland, and she says that you learn to build the models yourself. When you do an architectural project, you build a model, a kind of mock-up model, first of all, not too much detail. And if your project kind of goes to the next stage, you'll pay a professional model builder to build a better model. And yeah, coming from shipbuilding, we've always built half models just to show the hull form. And then every time a ship gets built, you build a large scale exterior model, I would say. So the Icon of the Seas, which my current employer built, has like a 5-meter long model that we had in Miami. So models are an essential part of the communication that's needed to build and design very large and complex things. So, one of the things about the model is it's a communication tool. And the physical model, when it's in a room like this, I think gives people the highest fidelity kind of collaboration. You're co-present, so you're present at the same time as other people. You see the same thing at the same time. So there's no ambiguity when you point at something. And it happens in a human and kind of natural way. And the argument on my whole presentation is that as we've gone digital, we've dehumanized this key part of design. And yeah, funnily enough, I was talking to my sister who now lectures at the university. And I said, do people still make models? And she said, well, actually much less now. And if you're in the architecture industry or AEC industry, you'll know that something that's happened in the last few years is BIM, 3D design tools. And that's something that's mandated, mostly because of the information that's in the model. People saw that as useful for operations. And because you've got the 3D model, you can do renderings and you can do other forms of communication, can make other forms of communication. And I think that's why the 3D physical model is kind of dying out. But the argument of this presentation is that the fidelity of collaboration is also going to go down as we eliminate physical models. But of course, we have a technology that may help us with that. So just to illustrate the point, if you go back to 50s, 60s, 70s, you'll see drawing offices like this on the left-hand side. It looks like a shipbuilding drawing office. They've got the French curves and the splines out there with the weights on them. As you can see, each drawing is actually a multiplayer drawing. There's several people on the same drawing, and there's several drawings in this drawing office, or lofting room maybe it would have been in this case. And you can see the manager can just walk around and talk to people, see what's going on. So communication and collaboration was visible and ambient. That's the argument I'm making there on the left-hand side. And if you go into the CAD room, the drawing office of a shipyard these days, or an architecture company, it will look more or less like this on the right. There are cubicles, there are people in there talking to each other, of course, but they are essentially on their own little asynchronous workstation. I know this from the shipyard, that there are people who come up to you and ask you questions, and that's an essential part of it. There are people who phone you regularly, especially if you're like a super user of the CAD system, and they try to find out where things are, what happened. So communication, when you're using these tools, is extremely important, and it still happens. It has to happen. But we've kind of lost the shared workspace. You're not co-present. You're on the phone. Maybe somebody comes up to you, but quite a lot of it happens on the phone. Or these days it'll happen in a meeting room or a Teams meeting. And something similar with 3D. I just made this to kind of make the point. So we had these large physical models on the left. They allowed people to gather around them. You could actually open this model up. Quite often they were on wheels, so you could open it up and walk inside it. And then when we went to 3D digital, so CAD, if you were lucky, you had a VR cave here, or sort of, they call this the Silicon Graphics Cave. And this is actually from my old employer, Aviva, back in Cambridge. They built this room. They had a very expensive computer to run this big Silicon Graphics machine, and they had an expensive beamer to project this in 2D onto the wall. So collaboration was so important that people would pay and book this room. There were only a few of them in the whole United Kingdom in order to review their model. So these are stakeholders there who need to review this together. They do have co-presence, which is great, but they're looking at a 3D model on the 2D screen. So they need this guy in the background. This is Paul Elton, my former colleague and mentor, driving them around there, who's an expert on how to move around 3D models. So this was okay. It was very expensive, and it didn't give you such a good collaboration experience as the physical model. But of course, the 3D digital model is needed to be made anyway. It doesn't cost as much to make as the physical model. And of course, you can use it directly to build the thing. Roll ahead to today, and this is kind of more likely the case. You're still collaborating in real time. You're on a real-time video call over Teams or Zooms and Zoomies, but you're probably looking at your 3D model again on a 2D screen, so a flat projection of your 2D model. And this is, for me, just a huge degradation in the fidelity and the quality of collaboration that you can have. You're not co-present, and you're not experiencing the 3D at the same time. So it's become presentation-based and not co-creative. Now, of course, there is a technology which helps us with this. So my personal story is I tried VR, I think in 99 and 2001 or something like that, in the automotive industry. It was heavy, clunky, very specialized devices. But then when the Vive came out, I think 2015, early 2016, I tried it at a friend of mine's, and I was like, wow, this is like proper 3D. I can walk around objects. I can experience things in full scale. It blew my mind. That's not me, by the way, on the left, but I felt like that. And it started, with games, which is great because the games were pretty accessible. They had gone through a lot of user experience design. And the games became multiplayer relatively quickly. There were some multiplayer games coming out, like Climby, I think it was. No, I can't remember, but multiplayer games came, at some point. And the problem is, I was working for a company that made CAD tools, engineering design 3D tools. And those programs, if you look at any of the CAD vendors, their core software, Autodesk, PTC Creo, Dassault CATIA, and Aviva's E3D, they're not made for real-time multiplayer collaboration. So you do have the ability to collaborate on a large engineering project because you have asynchronous collaboration. So you make your piece of the work, you draw some pipes, you do some structure, and then you check it into the database, and other people immediately can see that as their design context. But that's quite different from multiplayer. So if you play computer games, you collaborate as we do in real life. It's synchronous, it's instantaneous. So people can do really interesting things in computer games, build things together, for example, just being one of the very simple ones. But also, if you look at shooter games, people collaborate in real time and say, behind you over there, flank left, flank right. All these things are only possible when you see in real time what the other people are doing. There are some research papers on why this is useful in the design process. I think Eric Bowman, who now works at NVIDIA, had done a great paper on this that I saw a few years ago. It blew my mind. And he basically piped synchronous multiplayer into CAD tools. And it helps with problem solving. That was the gist of it. So we had this amazing visualization tool, but it was a single player experience. So a second bit of technology that helped was the game engine. So the game engine, of course, gives you cross-platform capability. You can deploy onto iOS, Android, PC, Mac. It gives you, with just a few lines of code that you can copy and paste, multiplayer. So you've got this real-time synchronous. You can see each other. You can see what the other people are doing. You can see what they're looking at, if it's in VR or with a head-tracked device. Yeah, and then finally, the game engine supports all of these devices. So we're still kind of going through this forming and storming phase with XR tools, where there are different devices coming out every year. And the game engines, the big ones, the commercial ones like Unity and Unreal, they support these different SDKs and libraries and DLLs that you need to develop applications for these devices. The problem with game engines, and it's down the bottom there, is that game engines are designed to visualize 3D, but not necessarily to handle mathematically correct three-dimensional data. So they always work with what's called mesh. So they display triangles, and they use formats that are tessellated into triangles, whereas CAD tools usually work with mathematically correct surfaces and forms. So you might get NURBS, B-splines, B-reps. There's a variety of different ways to describe mathematically correct geometry. And in order to make these two worlds work together, so to view a CAD model in a game engine, you have to convert it into mesh. And that is a very time-consuming process. And CAD models, by default, let's say, get converted into very heavy mesh because CAD is very accurate, has very fine tolerances. So you usually need to simplify. And this process, used to take months for very large offshore models like the Shell Prelude, this FLNG. So there was a problem to be solved there. And Aviva, the company I work for, addressed this in a very unique way. They hacked into the graphical pipeline of Unity, not literally, but we found a way to pipe our graphics into the Unity graphics pipeline so you could see our CAD graphics inside the game engine. And that solved a massive problem. It was literally saving 6 months of work. for some companies. Now, other companies like Gravity Sketch have come at this in another way. So excuse my hitting the keyboard. And they have developed their own native NURBS engine inside Unity. So this is another way to address the problem. So it's custom C++ code or whatever it was. But they can, in the Unity engine, define mathematically correct surfaces and export IGES files, for example. So this CAD kernel to game engine is a big part of solving this problem of collaboration, I think. And it allows you to then address the full spectrum of collaboration. So you can do collaboration in the way that CAD tools can, so asynchronous. I've done my work, I check it in, it goes on the cloud, and you can work on it. And that's what all CAD systems do. They are changing a little bit with the advent of cloud-first web or browser-based CAD or design tools. You can have this synchronous collaboration a little bit like Miro, for example, where you see where other people are pointing, but it's not really multiplayer as we know it in the gaming industry. So again, game engine, you have this full spectrum collaboration, asynchronous, synchronous real-time, so the multiplayer, and then multimodal, and that's what this presentation is about. So why is it important that collaboration can happen across different kinds of devices? So to look at that, I'm going to look at Gravity Sketch. Gravity Sketch is a tool which was originally created to make the 3D creation process easier. The founders had been fascinated by 3D printing and then tried to use Blender, whatever content creation tools, and found them very hard to use. Combined with the advent of Oculus DK2 and then the Vive and so on, they're like, okay, these devices allow you to draw in 3D space like Tilt Brush. So they took that concept and took it a bit further, made a sketching tool. They developed this amazing subdivision modeling capability in Unity, and then it became a bit more of a modeling tool. And these days, it's amazing what Gravity Sketch users do with this tool. So it's used in large companies like Kiska, various automotive design companies, apparel and footwear companies, so in the sportswear industry. And they basically recreate these design studios. And for me, this is not the only way people use Gravity Sketch, but it shows how far we've come. So as you can see here, the design studio, typical creative work environment, has quite a stereotypical kind of look. So you have various models of the things you're working on, various renderings printed out or maybe on a screen. And you always have this kind of wall of images that show how your concept has developed, because design is fundamentally an iterative process. And if you look at Gravity Sketch today, you can see that people recreate these studio kind of rooms. So the top right here is a showroom for Gravity Sketch automotive workflow, and we used to use that to show people what you can do with the tool. So there's a fully modeled surface of a car, there's the initial sketches on the right, and then there's all the kind of renderings in 2D that have been used to get to this concept. And then there's actually a great community room. If you download Gravity Sketch, you can try this room. And Diego Hernando, as you can see there, has created this brilliant showcase room. And this is quite common. So students, designers who are using these tools, they will create these exhibition rooms and use these to show to their managers or their professors their work. And this is the sort of key point. So how do those professors access these, and how do they join that collaboration experience when Gravity Sketch is fundamentally a VR tool? So I want to look at the different modes of collaboration that Gravity Sketch supported. So it was originally created as a single user tool. You put on your VR headset and you started to draw things in 3D. And these days you can make very good subdivision surfaces. But they added pretty quickly this multiplayer mode. So VR to VR mode, they call it collab. Basically, you make a room or a digital space or basically a file that is on the cloud, and that room, the collab room as they call it, can be accessed by more users at the same time. So it synchronizes the data. As you create the geometry, it's saving it directly on the cloud, and everybody sees the same geometry at the same time. So it was very clever. It's not just multiplayer in terms of tracking more users at the same time, giving them voice, giving them the ability to see each other's user interfaces. All the geometry, of course, was saved into the cloud and shared, and you had user access control through that mechanism. So that came out, I can't remember now, maybe 2018, 19, somewhere along the sort of mid part of their journey so far. And then more recent, the most important thing was this was a VR to VR mode, so symmetrical collaboration. But as I mentioned before, these showrooms, how do you bring in your boss or your professor? Bearing in mind that the reality is today that a lot of people don't like wearing the VR headset. There's a stigma associated with it. It's probably getting less these days. Well, the answer was to create this 2D screen collaboration mode on the left-hand side here. So this was another client, a slightly different application, but you were essentially another multiplayer character, but you were not in a 6 degrees of freedom tracked head-mounted device. You were simply a camera which was running on a PC. So this was a Unity executable, and you could move around the scene using your keyboard and your mouse, and you can do some things in there. I'll get into that. And of course, in that room could be any number of VR users or other screen users. So this is asymmetrical collaboration. This is different types of devices, but in the same 3D digital space, and usually trying to do something together. Now, when the devices started to get color pass-through, so Meta, of course, with black and white pass-through on the Quest 2, and then this is the Quest Pro, then we could start to do these amazing collaboration scenarios. And they don't happen very often, to be honest, but this was always the dream, to go back to having the physical model in the room with the people standing around it. What you're looking at here is, of course, a digital model in the room, in a physical room, with people co-present. So they're in the same room at the same time, looking at the same thing at the same time. So they're having this, probably the best collaboration experience you can have. But they have to be in the studio. And of course, you can only bring in a car or a scale model of something. So it's limited. And I'd argue that even though we've recreated that big oil rig that you can walk into in the room, there are better ways to collaborate these days, such as VR to VR. But this is symmetrical AR to AR mode, or mixed reality to mixed reality mode. It takes a little bit of setup. You need to put this tape on the floor, some kind of anchor, so you can all have the same reference points and position the model exactly the same place for everybody. Otherwise, it doesn't really work. But it's cool. If you try it, it's cool. And of course, there are other permutations of this. So this is Nick Gravely, an amazing 3D digital sculptor. He does motorbikes, as you can see. And he will have a physical motorbike in his garage, his workshop. And he'll be modeling around that, maybe a new tank, maybe a new fairing, as you can see here. But he can bring in collaborators virtually. So he's physically in his workshop, but he can bring in several things. So a rendering in the background, he can bring that in, but he can bring in people, and that's amazing. He can bring in people who see, of course, a VR view. They don't see the same space, but they see the same geometry. So I wasn't able to get a good screenshot on the right-hand side there. It's not the same bike, but it is possible, of course. And with scanning technology like Gaussian splatting, you can imagine that you could actually scan the garage and bring that geometry in as well as a reference, or the bike, of course, which would be more useful. So that's also a really interesting way to work if you need to work around a physical object. Again, if you're talking purely digital objects, then for me, this virtual reality mode, 2D or fully VR, is the best collaboration experience you can have. You're co-present. You see something that doesn't need to be built before you go and build it physically. Saves resources, saves time, and you can have a very high fidelity collaboration experience with these modes. Something that basically never happens, but it's now possible, is of course two people using a 2D device, a laptop, an iPad, and they're just looking at these 3D objects as if they're in a computer game. So the reason I put this there is that this is very accessible. You can run this now on a browser, as you can see on the right-hand side. You can run this on your powerful gaming PC for a very big model, and you can go in there with other people. I don't know what the limit is, but tens of people, let's say, and you can do a showcase. You can do lectures in here. You can sell your product using this kind of experience without having to build it first. I think this is super powerful. It just doesn't get used as much as it should. Not everybody knows about Gravity Sketch, but if you want to sell a luxury yacht, you bring people in here for the screen collaboration mode, you send them a VR headset once they're used to this. I think it's extremely powerful to work with design projects before they have to be physically built. So don't forget, the automotive industry and, including motorcycles here, they build clay models, they do 3D printing, they do lots of physical prototyping. The cruise industry, this will blow your mind, they spend millions on each new class of cruise ship, so like the Icon class, to physically prototype a whole bunch of spaces on the ship, the restaurants, theaters, maybe not, roller coasters, entertainment venues. They build 1-to-1 scale models of this stuff to test it with people. And now, here's the perfect tool to reduce some of that physical prototyping, which, don't forget, is just chucked in the bin afterwards. So, right, Gravity Sketch. I'll just talk briefly through the features of this screen collaboration app. When I joined in 2021, it was fairly mature. You had to download a Unity executable, which I was quite critical of, because in an enterprise company like Volkswagen, they don't like that. IT doesn't like it. I'm very happy to say now that you can stream that in the browser and it works fine. They have built a nice presentation workflow in. So managers, non-3D native people struggle to move around a 3D space. If I'm really honest, the movement in the 3D space in Gravity Sketch is still a bit wonky, but they've put in this kind of slideshow mode where you can either walk through different scenes or views, or a VR user more likely can take you through these views, so you have this curated experience, and that's really important for non-3D natives. If you are happy to move around using the keyboard and the mouse, and you're fine with 3D models and 3D navigation, then there's a pretty good workflow built in for review. This means they keep their users inside the Gravity Sketch ecosystem. The reality is big companies like to have one kind of commenting tool across the whole workflow. It's just not possible. But Gravity Sketch have done a very good job to make this review workflow with annotations and commenting, and you can tick off things once they're addressed. There's this great balance of agency and presence for screen users, so there's not too many buttons in there. You feel like you're joining a Teams meeting. It's a nice experience to join these screen collaboration rooms these days, especially if it's a nice room like this one. But I would say it's evolving into an editing tool. So I think they're experimenting. You can now right-click on geometry and edit the 3D points, move things around. You can import geometry. This is very useful for the VR user to come in and do a quick edit. Or perhaps if you don't have your VR headset with you, can still do stuff. It's useful for the people who are reviewing with you, the design managers, the seniors. They can say, well, have you tried, tweaking this in this way? Just move something for you to make a suggestion. So it's very interesting, the development of it, but it's a slick collaboration tool that's got enough targeted features for managers, reviewers. So I think it's fantastic. In the presentation in Hamburg, I gave a little demo. I'm not going to do just that just now. You can look up other videos on YouTube. Archeo, one of my favorites. It's a tool for architecture and collaboration. Again, like in the first mile, like Gravity Sketch, maybe not quite, but it's got a very good integration with Revit and now Navisworks, which are two of the main tools used for creating geometry and reviewing projects. And it works on VR, on the iPad, on Steam, and the iPhone, of course, because it's this iOS app. What that means is that the iOS app has got proper touchscreen optimized UX. So it's a normal single finger to rotate, 2 fingers to zoom, 2-finger drag to do pan. And that is the best way for non-native 3D people to experience a 3D model. There's no other easier way that I know of. It's got fully functional collaboration tools. So you've got post-it notes, you can sketch on top of geometry. It's very easy to access a collaboration room as a guest. It's essentially a meeting that you join and all the geometry synchronizes. It's a great app. Plus, being on the iPad, it's got the, Core AR. Can't remember the name of these SDKs in these two platforms, but uses the cameras and SLAM to allow you to put that model in real world, and you can have multiple people walking around with iPads as if you had the physical model there. And that for architects is a great win when you don't have a physical model. So one of my favorites there. Shapes XR, it's a kind of 3D prototyping tool. Very briefly, they added a very feature-rich web editor. So it runs in the browser, no installs. And as you can see there on the screenshot, it's got complex toolbar. So it's not a manager tool, but it's a very good tool for creators. So I quite often go in there and create geometry, copy paste things, move things around. It's perfect for that. So they did a great job making a fully functional web editor, which Gravity Sketch weren't doing in the beginning, but I think they're getting there. Resolve, I've only ever had the demo version of this. I keep writing to Angel say about this, but he's too busy being successful, I think. This is designed for design review, and it was a VR first tool, but I was very happy to see that they added about a year ago their Lightning viewer, which runs in the browser, doesn't need an install, and as you can see there, it supports multiplayer across multi-devices, VR and screen, and it's got all the features that you'd want. They've done a very good job with that. So briefly, there's these kind of challenges. When you do this, you're effectively not doubling, but you need to develop two apps. Gravity Sketch had a different product manager for this, which made a lot of sense. It's a different type of UX. And I would say you got to reduce that friction to a minimum. So don't forget the management type, the review type might not be 3D natives. They might not be comfortable with that, but Gravity Sketch is a great example of a workflow that gets you into a collaboration session easily. And I think they're close to being that, very, very slick, the Zoom of 3D collaboration. There are many opportunities too, of course, because you now have two applications, and this is the big question. Do Gravity Sketch, Archeo put more effort into their 2D apps and start to get more 2D users, so users using through a two-dimensional device, I should say. There are many more of them, and there's a triangle that you draw if you're in this industry where you've got your sort of super users, high value, less of them, but everybody wants to go for this collaboration market because there are more people who need to view the 3D model than need to create it. But usually those seats are very low cost, if not free, which has been the sort of model for a while. So if you look at Autodesk, for example, they've got Navisworks. There are millions of users of Navisworks. There's a free version of it. And then their design tools, there are also millions of users of their design tools, but less generally. And their price per seat is much more. Other opportunities, you're probably using a game engine, or are you? That's the key question. And I think that gives you a head start over these CAD incumbents. But, they're coming for this space. They're either acquiring game engines or they're acquiring companies that are using game engines. So the Wild, I think, was acquired by Autodesk. They've got Workshop XR just now, and it's getting there. It's a big company, so they're not as nimble as they used to be. And there's other companies coming who are using the browser as their main kind of development tool. And that offers massive advantages in terms of friction and number of users you can address. And we'll get back to that in the conclusion. So these are the functionality that you really need in your screen collaboration app. So browser joined by code for low friction access to the room, presenter tools to give a curated experience, markup and laser pointer to give the user agency. So they really need something to do, especially because they're not really co-present with you. They don't feel this immersion like the VR user does. Voice over IP is great to keep people in the session. You can add features like spatial proximity chat so people can understand where people are. That helps. And easy 3D navigation. So using WASD is just not super good for non-native 3D people. But if your users are native 3D users, then fine. So the questions I left at the end of this recording were, what becomes the dominant collaboration mode? Are people going to more and more use fully immersive ways to experience this? So at the moment, that's the headset. Or will people just say, okay, I need to access 3D, but I'm happy to just do that through my screen. I can, join the dots between what I see on the screen and what it means in 3D. Or is it just this, I've always believed it will be this spectrum between these devices. So you'll use your VR headset when you want a really good three-dimensional experience. And, you'll just turn on your screen if you don't have time, or you don't really need to experience it in 3D. So if you just want to join a meeting and approve something, maybe a manager or somebody who just doesn't have time. So I think it's a spectrum. Maybe one of them will become the more dominant one in the future. I think the issue is the developers making these tools. They in this case they've all come from the VR side and added their 2D mode. But there are other companies coming from the 2D side of things, but adding synchronous collaboration and not really thinking about VR because the market is small, let's say, for now. So how do we get there? Is it XR first, VR first, and then a game engine? Or is it 2D first in a browser? So this is like Spline, I think it's called, Motif. These kind of tools are, the what do you call it? The Miro of 3D collaboration. I personally prefer the VR mode, but that's just where I've come from. So collaboration is a spectrum. I think you need to support all the devices in a good way. It's more effort for the developers. But collaboration is so important in these industries that there is a market there. So treat your screen users as first-class collaboration citizens, is usually what I say. That's all for now. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And as I said, there will be a Notebook LM podcast on my Spotify channel, which I'll put in the comments somewhere or in the description, and maybe even the explainer on another video. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.